Hello, viewers, and welcome to yet another Warhammer 40,000 Conquest video production. My name is Mitch, and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today, I'm pleased to present yet another installment in my series of Community Spotlight videos, in which I interview various prominent and upstanding members of our Conquest LCG community. In specific, we discuss their favorite decks, how best to play their favorite warlords, and hopefully through their sharing their personal experience, opinions, and advice, they'll be able to provide you with a host of information useful to both new and veteran players alike. Be sure to let me know what you think of this specific video in the comments below, and as always, I'm ever open to constructive criticism. But with our introduction aside, let's kick things off with a discussion of Commander Shadowsun. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, but for the greater good of this interview, before you and I catch up on our Mobile Suit Gundam and Neon Genesis Evangelion, where might our viewership know you from, and how do you contribute to the Conquest community?
Well, I'm one of the founding members of the Tactical Squad podcast. So we do that. We've been doing that since probably November, I think. You can find us. We have a website, thetacticalsquad.com, which is brand new. I think this is the first place I've officially said it other than our Twitter.
Awesome. I'm honored.
Yeah, and you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter, Tac Squad. And yeah, other than that, I'm also not less so now than before, but I've kind of been the de facto community organizer for the Greater Toronto area in Canada, and we have a pretty good community here. John Gobet is also one of our other league community organizers. He has a pretty good group of players up in the northern part of the city, and John Yo, one of the other podcast members, also organizes. So that's probably the two places people are most likely to know me from, either the podcast or from tournament organizing. And actually, I will be the head judge for Canadian Nationals this year. So if you come to Canadian Nationals, I will yell at you all day.
Well, that is absolutely incredible, and I'll definitely be sure to include, relevant links in the description below for this video, so be sure to check that out if you want to figure out where to get as much Tactical Squad as you can handle. And I don't think you mentioned it, but your name is Elizabeth, so...
Yes! Oh god, I'm so bad at introducing myself. Yes, I am Elizabeth.
It's all good. It's all good. But I think you've definitely proven yourself to be one of the most involved of all of our community members, but how long have you been playing Conquest, and how did you get started in the first place?
Well, those are kind of two big questions. Okay, well, I've been playing pretty much since as soon as it was on Octagon. So, as soon as we got all the cards uploaded, someone had uploaded all the cards from the core set within a week of Gen Con last year.
Okay.
And I probably started playing within a day of that. Getting to playing Conquest was kind of a strange journey. I mean, I probably became a nerd because of the Pokemon trading card game and the Game Boy games. But I was really kind of really drawn into tabletop hobbying with the Warhammer Fantasy and then Warhammer 40K miniature games.
Sure.
That kind of has led me on the route to lots of other games, and I ended up playing X-Wing miniatures, which introduced me to Fantasy Flight, which then led me to the Lord of the Rings card game, which then led me to Netrunner. And around the time that this game was announced, I was giving the Star Wars card game a go. And I was very disappointed. Star Wars is one of my favorite IPs, and the game just felt clunky and awkward to me, and I couldn't get into it, and I was sad, and it left a hole. And just very conveniently timed, Conquest was announced and showed up to fill that hole. So
You
I pretty
know,
much...
as tragic as it is to say, I can very much identify with being supremely disappointed with the Star Wars LCG in particular. I myself did a Gen Con demo, and I just remember being so, unamazed by it and left with just this feeling that it was so much kind of missed potential. So, I apologize for interrupting you there, but
No,
definitely
that's okay.
Conquest seems like it's everything I had initially wished that the Star Wars LCG would be.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, the Conquest has a lot of the intriguing things that Star Wars does, or some intriguing things that Star Wars does, like just like the pod system being introduced with the Warlords, and I think that was one of the most intriguing things to me was deck building in that game. But the hand management was just too difficult. And what's better, what's better when you have difficulty with hand management than having a game where you don't have to manage your hand? So
Exactly, that works. But yeah, I'll just say, one of the particularly appealing things about, your contributions to Tactical Squad and the community is that I've been kind of surprised at just how many people play this card game without any kind of background in 40K or the tabletop game at all. So, yourself having experience with the lore and the fluff and the miniatures and things like that, it's been a lot of fun interacting with you just because we share at least some modicum of understanding of such a rich universe that this game is drawn from. So I just think it makes it a much more rich and kind of flavorful experience when you can enjoy it for more than just being a stellar card game, but just this really, enthralling, ensorceling, intellectual property.
absolutely. And I think yeah, I mean, I played 40K for probably a decade, and I missed it. I quit because I just got too frustrated with the costs and the way that GW conducts the rule sets and stuff. And this has like been everything I could hope for to like fill that hole. Um, and the universe is just so good, and um, all the podcasts have something awesome about them. But I actually really enjoy listening to the guys at Trexas Sector just because they're one of the few podcasts who do talk about fluff, and like listening to their book reviews and whatever
Definitely.
is awesome. And yeah, and I think it's like it's cool to see so many people come into the game and then be like, oh, this is kind of a cool story and want to learn more. And it's awesome to get to share that. All of us on the Tactical Squad are like longtime miniatures gamers. We all have been into the 40K universe for a while, so it's definitely a big thing for us is that interaction of the story. So
Sure. Well, before we, delve deep into our Conquest-specific content, what faction did you play on the tabletop iteration?
oh, a lot of them. Um, I
So I can see
started,
cost being a problem then.
yeah, I mean, you just kind of, I just kind of rotated through. So I think my first army was Astra Militarum, which would have been Imperial Guard at the time.
Sure.
And that turned into Tau. Um, and then those Tau kind of became neglected, and I started making a Blood Angels army, specifically out of the Space Marines. So I'm like waiting with bated breath for more Blood Angels cards and a Blood Angels Warlord. I've definitely theory crafted a lot of different Blood Angels concepts. Um, and then I played some Dark Eldar for a while when they were re-released. God, that would have been 5 years ago now.
Whoa, time
Weird.
flies.
Yeah, the new Dark Eldar aren't so new anymore. And then I ended up back with Tau. So the last thing I was playing before I quit was Tau with the new edition of their Codex. So Tau is probably Tau and Blood Angels are probably my two main loves in the 40K universe. Actually, I lied. I didn't start with that Astra Militarum. I started with Blood Angels way back when they had the supplementary codex in like second or third edition. Back when there was a metal ball predator model.
So long, long before my day. But I think I dabbled in just collecting and painting Tyranids when it was in 5th edition, I believe.
Okay.
But since you happen to mention Tau, Speak of the Devil, out of all the warlords we've seen so far in Conquest, in doing these interviews, I've had various community members come on and talk about some of their personal favorite warlords, and not wanting to have, everybody pick Kith or Kato or Eldorath as their, absolute favorites. One of your runner-ups, one of your preferences was nevertheless Commander Shadowsun. So
Hmm.
what makes the Tau faction appealing to you, and what is special about Shadowsun? What makes her stand out among all your other options?
Oh, I think it's more than anything, it's a personal history thing. I think Tower, one of my favorite tabletop factions. I think they're represented in a really intriguing way in the card game. Shadow Sun, um, I love crisis suits. I love the stealth suits. I love all of the battle suits. I'm a huge anime nerd, or well, not so much anymore, but I have a history of being a huge anime fangirl, and so like Shadow Sun is was a pretty easy pick for me straight out of the box. She's probably the one I went to first. Um, I mean, being one of the few female characters in the 40K universe helps a bit.
Sure,
um,
sure.
uh,
They're unfortunately few and far between. What's kind of interesting so far about this game is similar to what I saw in the Lord of the Rings game, is some of FFG's fabricated characters have been female, so they've at least been trying to throw a bone to a demographic that's historically kind of tragically underserved by, so many of these long-standing IPs.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and I noticed recently, like along that vein, is they're also including a lot of the characters in the 40K universe are usually pretty white also if they're human, and they've started including more characters of color there too,
Right.
which is cool. So but yeah, and so I like Shadow Sun. I think she has really interesting synergies. Um, I think she is my favorite warlord. She's just not quite there yet, and I think as soon as she gets to like there, quote unquote, in a competitive sense, she will be the main character I play the majority of the time. Unless I don't know, we'll see what the next Tau Warlord is. I think they're gonna be in a crisis suit also, so that may be a big contender for my love. We'll see.
Well, definitely. But one of the coolest things about these videos is interviewing players like yourself with, countless hours of actual gameplay experience, numberless actual clocked tabletop games where we can look at a warlord that's traditionally seen as being underperforming or undervalued or weak, like Commander Shadowsun, that some players might dismiss out of hand, and really kind of figure out how can you try to use this warlord with their faction to the best of their ability to give them, the best fighting chance, so that if you do happen to maybe take it to a tournament or try to bring it up to a competitive level just to optimize your chances, like Team Covenant recently, or no, sorry, it was the Roseville, Minnesota at Fantasy Flight's Game Center. They televised their regional championships, and one of the participants at least played Commander Shadowsun.
Hmm.
I don't, I don't recall how they did in their match, but it was at least nice to see one of those, underestimated warlords make an appearance. I suppose, seeing as how our first cycle of war packs has all come out by now and we've started to see some of our alternatives, what's kept you back from trying out On Shi? Or not so much trying out, but why stay faithful to Shadowsun?
A few things. I mean, I'm a bit of a hipster, so I don't want to play what's as popular.
Sure, sure.
But also, I find like Anshi's playstyle is definitely really enjoyable, and I enjoy the tricks. But as far as tricks go, um, in this in similar styles of like control and such, I'd rather be playing Eldorath. And I think Shadowsun provides something pretty unique to this game in her playstyle that no other warlord really does. She kind of stands apart in the way she functions and what she does and the way you build her deck, and she's very unique in her flavor. And I think that's probably the biggest appeal to me for staying with her right now is why I come back to her and play her um, at all. Really, is that she's quite unique, I think.
Well, I suppose what is it specifically that you're mentioning? Like the recursion of attachments, or what
Uh,
specifically?
the recursion of attachments is definitely a big part of it. I think the way you think about using your cards, the fact that she recurs her attachments, or can play them out of hand, um, the way her signature unit functions, the stealth cadre, the gun drones. I mean, gun drones are often in on she decks, but them along with the stealth cadre, the interactions of your cards, the fact that you're not depending on, you're using different supports than other decks would use, the ambush platform, things like that. You're just getting this interesting synergy with your attachments. The way you use shield cards, I think, is the big thing that she changes.
Definitely.
And just the overall thinking of how you play through a turn, because you do have some interesting unexpected layers to your commitment for people, and it's very different than like Eldrath does a thing when he goes to a planet, um, or like Kith does a thing when she goes to a planet, and what planet they go to changes the game. But Commander Shadowsun doesn't just have a variable of what planet does she go to do her thing. It's what unit does she do her thing on, and there's all these layers of how you use her strategy and what card interactions you have going on.
Sure. I mean, I think just using the, Shadowsun Stealth Cadre as an example, I like that it has some built-in options to it. Like, you can either deploy it as a unit, or you can put it into play as an attachment. Commander Shadowsun's ability, it's not, she moves to a planet and puts a token into play. It's has any number of different effects that are going to, ever change as our card pool itself grows. So it's not just this, I kill a unit, I get a resource token. It's always changing. It's a little bit more dynamic, and it kind of puts a spin on the traditional Warlord reaction. So, I don't know. It's just, there's something intriguing and kind of, very interesting about Shadowsun that I agree with you that I don't think any other Warlord quite approximates or comes close to.
Absolutely, and I think at this point, like a good way to reference her too is that we don't have many warlords that when a certain type of card comes out, you immediately go back and look at that warlord's deck. Every time an attachment comes out for a Tau, you will go back and look at Shadowsun's deck and see how does this change her, even if you don't play Shadowsun regularly, because suddenly that may completely change the face of her deck,
Right.
one attachment. Or a unit that interacts with attachments, like the broadside when it came out was an immediate like, how does this change Shadowsun's deck? And you go back and you look, and it has an impact. Those cards have an impact on her as a warlord in a much more intriguing way than some other cards do for their respective factions. Like there's, when a Space Wolf comes out, you'll go back and look at Ragnar and be like, oh, how does this change my Ragnar deck? But
Sure.
only, like, not to the same degree. It doesn't change him in an integral way. It just changes its interaction with other Space Wolf cards. So
Sure, it's just, it almost strikes me as more superficial in a sense. Like, he has the Space Wolf trait, so he meets this criteria.
Mhm.
Whereas Commander Shadowsun, it's a much more kind of an intimate relationship with these attachments. It just has much greater of an influence, I think, as opposed to just sticking with an interesting theme or maybe getting an additional hit point by merit of the trait that you have printed on your card.
Exactly, yeah.
But just taking a closer look at Commander Shadowsun and some of the compulsion to play her in the first place, what do you think some of her greatest strengths are, just as a character?
Um, well, I think card utility is really her main strength. I mentioned the way she utilizes shields. Um, you should almost never play an attachment out of hand with her ability. Um, you want to get double duty out of every single attachment in your deck. You want to shield with it first, and then you want to recur it.
Sure.
I mean, to a degree, obviously, you're going to use ambush platforms to bring a lot of things into play in the middle of combat, but I think it's just that card efficiency is what you're trying to leverage with her. She also, I mean, 7 health is it's not something to balk at. It does make her more survivable than a lot of other warlords. Unfortunately, she only has 1 attack, even though she has 2 melt-a-guns strapped to her arms,
Right.
which makes me sad, but, it's fine. The 7 health definitely does a lot, and she does have an attachment that you can put on her to give her that second attack. So I think if there's ever an attachment that in Tau that you can attach to, say, a fire warrior, or I guess a Shasou in her case, then you'll be able to, that'll have a huge impact on her playstyle. But definitely her health and the use of her ability.
Well, most definitely. Just given how Commander Shadowsun is, she's certainly not seen an abundant amount of play in like a really competitive context. But do you feel there are any matchups that she excels at? Any specific warlords that she can kind of pick apart or is particularly strong against?
Hmm. I don't know. That's an interesting question. I think I think the interesting thing I found about her is she doesn't really necessarily feel any stronger or weaker against any specific warlord to me. She seems pretty like every warlord is pretty much an even match for her. I guess some of the weaker warlords are obviously an easier match than some of the strongest warlords because
Sure.
that's just the nature of the game. But um, definitely, I think just how in general, because of gun drones and the abundance of ranged units, do fare better against swarm-style armies. So she is certainly capable of dealing more with a large number of units that you may see out of Astra Militarum or Dark Eldar or Zogwart, I guess.
Sure.
So
Sure.
um,
Well,
those are she definitely has more tools to deal with like that big swarm than I think some other factions do.
Well, and just something I enjoy about not just her and her signature squad, but just kind of the Tau cards someone would think to include in her deck. It just seems like it does answer all comers reasonably well, in that a lot of those cards have a bit of built-in flexibility. Like, if you need to increase the stats of one unit, you could simply use the Stealth Cadre to, buff it up, or if you're looking to win as many command struggles as possible, you've got that inherent flexibility of being able to actually deploy it as an army unit. So, just like you mentioned, using, attachments as shields more freely, you've got a little bit of flexibility in regard to what command struggles you're trying to win, just because you do have that card and at times resource efficiency through her reaction. And then cards like, gun drones where you can use them as an attachment or you can use them as a unit. I just really like having all those different options where it just seems as though her ebb and flow is at least has the potential, or the theme is there, where it's a little bit less predictable and more able to kind of shift itself to ideally counter exactly what you're going up against. So with some additional tools to really stoke that fire, I think she has the potential, as do so many of these warlords, to really be fantastic. But I'm just really excited to see where everything ends up going.
Absolutely. I think also just because of Tao's strong command game, that has a big impact on the overall deck too. So
definitely. Well, when it comes to just deck construction, Tau have the option of either allying with Eldar or the Space Marines. What's your preference nowadays?
I switch back and forth. Currently, I've been toying more with Eldar. I mean, I play Eldar most competitively, so I'm most familiar with their card pool.
Sure.
But I think both Space Marines and Eldar have a lot to offer. If you look at Space Marines, there's probably two cards that you're looking at. Mainly is the Tactical Squad. It's the which you are going to add have as an option to add gun drones to, which, an AoE 3 unit for you're probably only going to pay the 2 you originally paid for and an extra card is nothing to like sniff at. It's a pretty big deal. And then also one of the faction's bigger weaknesses is targeted abilities. So you'll get those big units that, all it takes is to be exhausted or to be routed, and then you're kind of like, oh, well, that turns over.
Right.
And so Land Raider provides a lot more staying power to your units overall, because now they have to deal with the Land Raider first before they can actually deal with the rest of your units. Out of Eldar, you're looking at Warlock Destructors, because anyone who can ally with any Eldar deck is looking at Warlock Destructors.
Definitely.
I also have found an interesting splash is the Black Guardians, which is kind of a card that has generally been less impressive for a lot of people. There's almost no reason to include it in an Eldar deck. But you have a very strong command presence already, so the lack of any icons isn't the worst. And as a 2/4, it's quite a durable unit that you can augment really easily. So it's a 2/4 that you make a 4/6, or it's a 2/4 that you make a 5/4 with the ion rifle. And it's cheap, so it's a body that can get big fast for cheap, and I think that's a huge benefit to your deck. And a lot of Tau units Tau aren't necessarily fragile, but particularly a lot of their smaller line units don't have much health. You don't have as many 3 health units as some other factions do for less than a cost of. Well, you have none for cost 2 or 3, or
Sure.
cost 1 or 2.
Sure.
You have some 3 cost ones, but there's a lot of 3 cost choices that you probably want to include for their hitting power, and so it's a bit of a negotiation in that 4 health. It really helps your 2 cost slots.
Well, and particularly considering that Shadowsun's ability, requires a partner at her planet to really get most benefit from it under normal situations, it makes a lot of sense to have an affordable, hardy unit to, go alongside her. And then whether or not it has any command icons, if you're winning the planet just because your Warlord's showing up, potentially, that might not make any difference at all.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely true also. Yeah. And Yeah, I think both factions are pretty viable. You're probably using largely Tau cards at this point, just because Tau has so many strong cards in faction. And this deck, the big thing I found about building a Shadowsun deck is you never have enough space. So
Sure. Lot of different options. I suppose, what are some of your just staples for inclusion, like some of your favored command units, some of your favorite combat units?
um, I mean, the deck's always changing because it's just, I find it's still very much in the exploration phases for me. Stable-wise, though, like, Recon Drone and Warlord Marksman should go in every Tau deck forever. Just do it. Um, Vasha Trailblazer is quite a strong choice. I always put in 3 gun drones. I generally put in 3 Earth Case Technicians. Um, Ion rifles, probably 3 of. Tau have an interesting decision with the number of 2 shield cards that they have between Deception, Heavy Marker Drone, and Repulsor Impact Field. I generally include like 5 of some combination of those 3 cards.
Okay.
Some ambush platforms usually. Morkan Recruits are a really powerful card. I think any faction who could include a 2-class Warlord groupie in their deck probably is doing it right now. There's a lot of things. I mean, the deck is kind of built itself about 70% of the way, and then you make some secondary choices based on what you have. But I think definitely, particularly looking at your cheaper 1 and 2 cost command units in large amounts with some 2 cost combat units and then a few bigger units. I've go back and forth between toying with broadsides and Crisis Battle Guard for my bigger unit slots.
Well, and you happen to mention specific targeting effects being one of the areas of vulnerability for Shadowsun and perhaps the Tau just as a whole. Cards like Archon's Terror, or maybe in some cases even like a Tzeentch's Firestorm, considering that so many of the ranged units are relatively squishy. Do you feel that she or the Tau faction have any other significant areas of weakness where they kind of struggle or flounder?
I think her deck, I think Tau outside of the ethereal trait don't have as many combat tricks as some of the other factions do. I think when you look at the decks that people are touting as the top decks right now, the really common theme is they have lots of good combat tricks. And most of Tau's combat tricks are very attack-oriented. So you're popping attachments into play or readying units to get in secondary attacks or bigger attacks.
Right.
And so I think overall the faction just lacks that little bit of extra control in the combat phase that they may need. They certainly don't hurt. They certainly aren't wet noodles when it comes to damage. They can put out a lot and like get pretty big fast. So
Sure.
Their weaknesses are mostly defensive, I think, at this point.
Well, I think you definitely bring up a good point where it's there's a little bit of kind of laying all your cards on the table. Like, granted, there's ambush platform, but there's certainly no drop pod assault or gift of Isha to refill your side of the table once you've started to lose a few of your units. And once things are gone, apart from her recursion effect, it seems like they kind of stay that way. There's no nasty surprise. I mean, I suppose you could use eager recruits, but apart from that, it seems like things are maybe ever so slightly more predictable.
Yeah, they certainly are to a degree, and I think learning to play her deck unpredictably is one of the big curves to doing well with her. But I mean, there's a degree of unpredictability just even between for the Tauva being able to ready units, and then also Ennui Prelate is like she's not ethereal focused, but Ennui Prelate still does a lot of work just with that +1 attack to everything,
Definitely.
and the extra body in the middle of combat. If you have the money, it's a good call, I think. But
well, do you feel like there are any matchups that give you a lot of trouble, or specific units that really work against the against the greater good, as cliche as that is?
get that one in as many times as possible. uh, e- I'm not sure. I think, I think Eldar can be a bit of a problem, certainly between the exhaust effects and, Terror is just a problem, period,
Definitely.
for Tau. Terror is a problem for everyone, but Tau have fewer ways of coping with it.
Sure.
Um,
And all the more, high value, high investment units that make fantastic targets for effects like that.
Exactly, and so those two things, a lot of the weaknesses of the deck definitely converge in Eldar as a faction. Um, but also just like chaos, like direct damage effects can be a pain. Warp Storm is less of a concern because you have lots of attachments floating around, so you don't need to worry about it. But I think like if you look at Nurgling Bomb in a Zerathor deck, you're just you're not going to be super happy. That's going to be 2 damage to a lot of things. And a lot of your units are going to have 2 Hell. So,
right.
Gleeful Plague Beasts are a pain. I think they're a pain for a lot of people, though. So,
I've heard bad things. That's all I
yeah.
can say about that one. But I suppose, what's your just general play style? So if somebody's interested in giving Commander Shadowsun a shot, how do you kind of construct your gameplay itself? Like, how do you distribute your command units? Are there any, like, tips or tricks that you can think of?
I think certainly in her deck, the more cards you can have, the better. You have a lot of good ways of saving yourself money between her ability and ambush platforms. You have a good way of getting cost efficiency out of the cards that you have. So the more cards you can draw, the better. Resources never hurt, obviously, but I've found running her with lots of things that cost 3 or less, which seems to be the tendency of decks in general lately, but a lot of things that cost 3 or less. So just getting as much efficiency out of your cards as possible and having as many cards as you can to do that. So focusing on card draw, I think in the command phase is a big thing. And if you can prevent your opponent from getting card draw, then you don't have to worry about as many of her weaknesses, right? So if you're able to kind of choke your opponent to a degree, then they're just, how many Archon's Terrors are they going to see if they're not drawing any cards, right?
Right.
And then aside from that command focus, I think she's quite, I think she's kind of aggro to a degree. You want to just roll through the planets if you can. You want to go in, beef stuff up, just beat them down and bully them as much as you can, and just throw your shield cards at them because you're gonna be bringing those cards back. Hold your key attachments in your hand when you can't, when you need to. Obviously, there's gonna be occasions when you're gonna want to surprise out a stealth cadre or a ion rifle in the middle of combat with an ambush platform.
Right.
But don't be afraid to use a lot of your attachments as shields because they're going to come back later in the game. And the more things you have in the trash, the more options you have mid-combat or when she commits to deal with the situation that's going on. And it's just like, obviously you can play things from her hand, but there's no shortage of options for her, but if you get the shields first, then all the better. You've gotten double duty out of that card.
Definitely. I think, certainly her signature attachment kind of speaks to being, useful, of course, put into play, but then that enormous shield value, being able to expend that relatively freely is pretty strong in and of itself. Something I was kind of curious about is, do you make much use of her signature event?
Um, yeah. So her signature event got a lot of hate. Um, I don't find myself using her signature event frequently during combat. Occasionally, you can use it to trick something in right before the next refresh phase, so it can get some shots in the next combat. But most often, what I do is I use it to set up for later turns. So if you end a battle with a unit with an attachment ready, and your units with your attachments are going to be your main combat units frequently,
Right.
um, I generally do this at after the battle's finished to put it at a later planet once all the battles are over. So now it's redeployed, it'll ready during the HQ phase, and it's there. It's not coming in from HQ exhausted.
Sure.
And so like its name, it is a squadron redeployment. You are redeploying your forces so they're ready for combat next round. And that's the primary use for it, I find. Depending on the flow of the game, I'll do that once or twice. I mean, twice tops, obviously, because there's only two. But I find myself doing it probably once most often and using the other one for a shield. So it's not the easiest card to use. It's certainly one of the less powerful signature events, but I think it has really good utility if you know how to use it correctly.
Sure. And again, just always, keeping your options in mind never hurts. Kind of in doing all the card reviews videos for cards that might be a little bit stale or outdated, I just think it never hurts to weigh each and every option, just because as we start to see new cards, just like Commander Shadowsun herself is going to be a warlord people go back to and always want to reassess. The same thing goes with all of her signature squad and really each and every other card, just because the power can shift significantly just based on whatever else comes out. So never hurts to have all the corner case options on the table. And even though it may not blow players away with its power level out the gate, there definitely is some significant and powerful utility with squadron redeployment. So,
Yeah. And also just another thing I just thought of is we've seen previews of the new Tau, the new unique Tau unit coming out in the Great Devourer. I forget what its name is, but it's Firewire Commander or Pathfinder Commander, I forget. Anyways, but his ability lets you sacrifice an attachment to ready him, so he has actually a pretty distinct synergy with this card because you can exhaust him because he has an attachment to move him, and then sacrifice that attachment to ready him, and so suddenly you have a combat, that unit just ready in the middle of combat.
definitely. So, case in point right there. Thank you very much.
I hadn't thought about that until literally the second.
Well, not a problem at all. I suppose, what are some of your just favorite plays or combos when it comes to Shadowsun and the Tau?
Things that get big. I think probably my favorite thing I've ever done is I had a Warlord marksman with 3 gun drones on it one time.
That's
and that
pretty
was
absurd.
Yeah, that was pretty absurd, and it was a lot of damage. And it didn't get routed, so it was a good day. I won that game. I think if you get her signature attachment, the command link drone out, and you have a lot of money, just popping that around everywhere can also be fun. Every unit has +1 attack for 1 resource,
Sure.
and you can play that around. Even the odds is pretty strong. Every so often you'll get someone who gets a bad surprise because you've played even the odds on one of their attachments, and they didn't see that coming.
Sure. Shifting it away at the opportune moment.
Yeah, exactly. If they wait too long, then they're gonna bite it. Yeah, otherwise, I mean, it's mostly just about what interesting interactions you do with her attachments. Like everything else with her deck, it's all about the attachments. So, yeah, I think gun drones do funny things a lot. A combo I really like frequently now is broadsides with repulsor fields.
Right.
So I'll use whatever. I use repulsor fields for shields earlier in the game, and then when Shadowsun goes to a planet with a broadside, she'll pop a repulsor field from the discard pile onto a broadside. And now it's area effect 2 with 6 health, and everything that attacks it takes 2 damage. And so your opponent wants to remove it as quickly as they can, but it's not the easiest thing to remove.
Definitely not, and especially considering that she, favors being very free with your shielding.
Exactly. Yeah, and ultimately, like, if you get down and you're able to get her signature attachment out, a lot of the weaknesses kind of fade away, just in the way of suddenly all of your attachments become event canceling abilities because you're just like, oh, this unit, I'm afraid of this unit going away now. I'm going to ambush platform an attachment onto it just to prevent it from being terrored.
Right.
With the communications relay. So there's lots of interesting interactions and combos I think you can do just centered around how different cards interact with attachments.
Sure. Well, I suppose any other thoughts or advice for players, looking to start with Shadowsun, or maybe looking to take her up again after maybe an initial few failed attempts?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing anyone should know about Shadowsun is a deck building thing, and that is do not count your stealth cadre or your gun drones as units. Take those 7 cards and set them aside in your deck, and then pick your, whatever, 27 to 31 units that you're going to include in your deck. Because you are going to feel bad about playing them as units if you ever have to. And I mean, it's not bad to play them as units. It's just not optimal. You want to be saving them as attachments frequently.
Sure.
And so in that deck building process, always be thinking about that. Don't count them as units. And you also can't count them as shields, unfortunately. So they those 7 cards will sit off in this little nether space and then build the rest of your deck like you'd build any other deck normally. I think also kind of counterintuitively, you don't want to go all in on attachments quite as much as you think you do.
Right.
I'll put 3 ion rifles in, but I don't really put 3 of any other attachment in her deck. Any other proper attachment, I'll put 3 gun drones, but they don't have shields. So finding that balance between having enough attachments to make the deck function and having enough events to have tricks in the middle of the game is important. So those, I think the big curve for Shadowsun is definitely deck building to a degree.
For sure. Well, I suppose anything else on your mind before we wrap things up?
Not really. I'm looking forward to seeing our next Tau Warlord and how he changes the game and what Tau cards we get next cycle. So,
well,
hopefully she'll be more exciting than ever.
Most definitely. So, I suppose with that said, why don't you go ahead and plug your podcast one last time, and we'll call it good.
Yeah. So find me and my ramblings on the Tactical Squad. That's thetacticalsquad.com. Facebook.com/TacSquad, Twitter.com/TacSquad, and you can email us at You can email us at thetaxsquad@gmail.com, I believe. Just go to our website. It's all there.
Sure.
So.
And in the video description, I'll make sure that all of the links function appropriately and the email address is appropriate. So I very much appreciate your time for coming on and having this interview, Elizabeth, and have a fantastic day.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, now that our interview has finally come to a close, I'll just wrap this video up by saying thank you once again for watching. Be sure to leave a comment sharing your own thoughts, perspective, opinion, and experience when it comes to Commander Shadowsun and the Tau faction as a whole. Interaction with viewers like you is the absolute highlight of my creating content for this channel, so please take a moment to let me know what you thought of this interview in particular, and what Warlord you'd like to see next. If you happen to know someone that might make a good candidate for one of these future interviews, please by all means feel free to share. But with that said, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you have not already done so. Contact me directly or keep in touch through all the social media outlets if you'd like. But in any case, thank you very much for watching, and be sure to check back soon for ever more Conquest content to come.